Hello everyone. This is a comparison between the clearly superior technologies L-Trac X and the Kensington Slimblade. I'll first start with this one. The L-Trac X has 3 buttons, a left button, a right button, and a middle button. And it has a flywheel, which is a scroll wheel without notches. The buttons are quite large. They extend from here all the way to pretty much the end. Not quite, but most of the way. And the third button has a little bump there, so you can find it just by touch, and it's located behind the ball. It has also 2 ports on the back where you can buy attachments for additional buttons, or you can try and make your own. On the bottom it has 4 rubber feet to keep it in place, and there are 3 screws where you can open the case in case you need to get on the inside to clean it. There's one that would normally be hidden underneath that tag, but I've already gotten to it. The Kensington Slimblade has 4 buttons, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it doesn't have a scroll wheel, but instead it has an arrangement of sensors which allow you to twist the ball in order to scroll. So this would be scrolling in one direction, this would be scrolling in the other direction, and it makes a little noise just so you can tell that you're scrolling. Just to note though, although on their own videos which promote the product they show you scrolling by twisting, most of the time you'll probably prefer to do it by pivoting, which is you keep one finger to hold the ball steady and you move it with the other. So that way you're moving around the cursor just normally, and then if you want to scroll, it's almost no change. Move around, scroll. Move around, scroll. As opposed to moving around and then having to take your hand off to scroll like this, which you would pretty much not want to do. This one has 4 rubber feet as well, and it has one kind of large rubber ring around the middle, and you can see that this one you don't need to unscrew because you just lift out the ball, and you can see the 2 sensors that they have there, and it sits on these small little bearings, and as you can see they do get quite dirty quite quickly, but if you need to clean it you just lift out the ball and just try and take the dust off with your fingers. This one to clean you'll have to unscrew it, and there are 3 metal bearings that you can clean with rubbing alcohol or whatnot, and this one only has a single sensor because that's all it needs. This one needs the 2 in order to do the scrolling. This one has 3200 DPI. This one doesn't have an official one listed on the site, but when a spokesperson was asked, they said it was 1000. There's been some people who have been trying to see if that's correct or not, but I'm not going to make a judgment on that. I'll give you a little comparison later so you can get a feel for it on your own, but for now I'll just stick to the facts. So just to demonstrate the DPI, I've made a little grid here in a spreadsheet so you can see as I move across the rows. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to place a finger on one edge of the ball and move until I hit the edge of the case on the other side. So this gives you an idea of how far you can move in one sweep of your hand, because any more than this and you'd have to lift your hand to make another sweep, unless you were to make lots of little motions, but just for one sweep. So I'll begin, where's my cursor? I'll begin on the left hand side, and I'm going to go across the ball and see how far I get. So this one makes it all the way to the edge of the screen, and I've pretty much just hit the end of the ball. Just for reference, the resolution being used here is 1920 by 1200, so that's quite a big distance. The acceleration settings in Windows are set to off, and the mouse speed is at the 6th position out of 11, which is the normal position where it doesn't alter your inputs. So now I'll do the same thing with the Kensington Slimblade. So I will put the cursor on the left hand side of the screen and move across it. And I've gotten not all the way across by the time I've hit the edge there. So you can see that this one clearly has more DPI, and one thing that's worth noting for this test, the way I did it is, this ball is very recessed into the body into the casing here. So the amount of ball surface that's exposed is quite a bit lower than here, which has quite a bit of surface exposed. So even though I went over a greater amount of surface here, I got an overall less distance on screen. So not only does this have lower DPI, but even with the greater surface, it still covered less distance. So this has quite a bit lower DPI than this. So they said 1,000, and that doesn't seem unreasonable, because that would be about a third of what this one has. And for the amount of distance I went and distance on there, it seems to be roughly okay. Also, because of how high up the ball is, it might be a bit awkward for your wrist, because in terms of ergonomics, you're going to have to incline your wrist quite a bit higher to reach up to the height of the ball. So I use about this point on my finger, like the first knuckle, to control the ball. So I have this kind of position. You don't generally use it with your fingertips like this. You would generally use this. So if you rest your hand on the table like this, just to give you an idea of the angle, this is about what you have. And from here, you can press all the buttons and scroll without having to move your hand. So it's quite comfortable. On this one, you're generally going to use the bottom part of the case here as a palm rest. And because the ball is receded into the case so much, you don't have to incline your wrist so much. So from a kind of neutral position, with my first knuckle on the ball, I put it down to rest on the case. And it has a lower inclination than when I do similar for this. The only problem I find is if you use this kind of position where you use your first knuckle to control the ball, you cannot reach the third mouse button, nor can you reach the scroll wheel. So for example, for me to reach that little bump that was on the third mouse button that I mentioned before, I can't reach it yet, and you can get it just about there. So you have to move maybe 1.5 inches forward. And then to reach the scroll wheel, you have to reach even further. Perhaps you hold the trackball a bit differently. Maybe you use your second knuckle, or someplace between the first and second. So if I use the second knuckle, which means you would control the ball like this, from here I can in fact touch that little bump on the third mouse button, but I still can't quite reach the scroll wheel. It's worth noting though that my hands are rather small, so perhaps if you have larger hands, that's not an issue. In general, I would say that this one clearly feels like it's better built, and the higher DPI speaks for itself. When you press these buttons, they feel much more solid. You can kind of hear it in the way they sound compared to these. These are a bit thinner and they feel much more plasticky and flimsy. Not so much that I would worry about them breaking, but this has a more satisfying press to it. But I prefer this one, mostly because I can keep my hand in one position while operating it. Again, this might just be because I have smaller hands, but your mileage may vary.